In a grim spectacle that blurred the lines between execution and brutal theater, Hugh Despenser was methodically dismantled not only in body but also in his very identity as a man. This was not just a mere execution. It was a calculated performance of revenge that merged humiliation with political theater in a way that appalled even a society accustomed to public brutality. Once the most powerful man in England, second only to King Edward II, Despenser had climbed from minor nobility to a position where earls trembled and queens plotted in shadows. But when Queen Isabella finally retaliated, she ensured that Despenser's demise would be as cruel as the suffering he had inflicted upon others. The method of his execution was chosen not for efficiency, but rather for the maximum suffering and symbolic disintegration of his legacy. Medieval chroniclers, who typically maintained a level of restraint in their descriptions of violence, recorded Despenser's execution with an unusual degree of detail and barely concealed satisfaction. They recognized they were witnessing not only the end of a man, but the violent closure of one of England's most turbulent political eras. The sheer brutality of his death revealed the deep-seated fear and animosity he had inspired during his tenure. What transforms a minor lord into the shadow ruler of a kingdom? What kind of reign of terror justifies such an elaborate and sadistic execution? The tale of Hugh Despenser illustrates unchecked ambition, royal favoritism, and the inevitable cost of absolute power. His rise was meteoric, his influence absolute, and his fall disastrous. Today, we delve into the darkest recesses of medieval England to uncover the twisted narrative of the king's favorite who flew too close to the sun. This is the story of how political ambition morphed into a death sentence, and how the concept of medieval justice could be more terrifying than any torture device ever devised. Hugh Despenser the Younger was born around 1286 into a world where loyalty to the crown could elevate a family to extraordinary heights or devastate them entirely. His father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, had already established the family's reputation as skilled courtiers and ruthless politicians. The younger Hugh inherited not just his father's name, but his cunning and dangerous appetite for power. The England of Hugh's youth was a kingdom in transition. Edward I, the formidable conqueror of the Scots, passed away in 1307, leaving the throne to his son, Edward II. This new king represented a stark contrast to his warrior father, more interested in rustic pursuits and the company of male favorites than in governing an empire. This weakness at the center of power created ample opportunities for ambitious men like Hugh Despenser. Edward II's reign began amid scandal, primarily due to his close relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight who became the king's most intimate companion and rumored lover. Gaveston's arrogance and the clear favoritism shown by Edward enraged the English nobility, who felt their own influence diminishing because of this foreign upstart. The Baron's fury culminated in Gaveston's murder in 1312, but this act only created a power vacuum that Hugh Despenser was expertly positioned to fill. Unlike Gaveston, who was perceived as an outsider, Despenser was undoubtedly part of the English nobility. He possessed the political instincts that Gaveston lacked, understanding that true power lay not in flaunting royal favoritism, but in methodically constructing an unassailable position within the existing power structure. Where Gaveston had been satisfied with titles and wealth, Despenser sought something far more perilous: actual control over the machinery of governance. By 1318, Hugh Despenser had cunningly woven himself into the king's inner circle, emerging as Edward II's new favorite, with many suspecting he was also his lover. However, Despenser brought a level of political sophistication and ruthless ambition that would make Gaveston's influence appear modest in comparison. He didn't merely want to be the king's confidant. He aspired to embody the king's will, to be his voice, his hand, and ultimately his de facto replacement. Despenser's transformation from courtier to shadow ruler began with key appointments in Edward II's administration. By 1322, he held the title of Chamberlain, granting him direct access to the king and control over who could approach the monarch. This role laid the foundation for his burgeoning power, enabling him to filter information, sway decisions, and gradually isolate Edward from other advisors. Despenser's methods were ruthlessly methodical. He identified potential threats among the nobility and systematically neutralized them through a mix of legal manipulation, economic pressure, and, when necessary, outright violence. Lords who opposed him found their lands unjustly confiscated, their families imprisoned, and their traditional rights stripped away through perverse interpretations of feudal law. The Welsh marsh became Despenser's particular fixation and primary source of wealth. These borderlands, customarily governed by semi-autonomous lords, were rich in resources. Despenser used his influence with the king to instigate conflicts with the marcher lords, then swooped in to claim their territories when they were defeated or forced into exile. Within a few years, he amassed a personal domain that rivaled royal estates. What made Despenser especially menacing was his keen understanding of bureaucracy and law. Unlike previous royal favorites who relied solely on the king's protection, Despenser constructed a sprawling network of legal justifications for his actions. He filled courts with supporters, manipulated parliamentary proceedings, and created a paper trail that lent an air of legitimacy to his land grabs and political purges. His systematic approach left his victims often legally powerless to resist. By 1324, Hugh Despenser had effectively become the ruler of England in all but name. Edward II, increasingly reliant on Despenser for counsel and affection, rarely made significant decisions without consulting him. Foreign ambassadors reported that meetings with the king were meaningless without Despenser's presence, and real negotiations took place in private discussions with the favorite. Traditional nobility found themselves effectively excluded from political power, relegated to spectators in their own kingdom. Despenser's reign was characterized by a relentless campaign of terror against anyone who dared defy him. His enemies faced not only political marginalization but total annihilation. In 1322, the Earl of Lancaster, a powerful noble and cousin to the king, was executed for daring to oppose Despenser's influence. This execution sent an unmistakable message. Not even royal blood could shield those who stood against the favorite. Despenser's persecution extended beyond simple elimination to include deliberate humiliation and anguish. Opposing lords weren't merely killed or exiled. They were stripped of dignity through public trials rife with fabricated charges, forced to witness the imprisonment or impoverishment of their families, and subjected to punishments designed to crush their spirits before breaking their bodies. More often than not, psychological torture proved to be a more effective weapon than physical violence. Despenser meticulously constructed a network of informants and supporters expanding to every tier of English society. Servants in noble households, clerks in governmental offices, and even members of the clergy found themselves either coerced or recruited into Despenser's intelligence network. This environment bred paranoia. No conversation felt safe, and no alliance was secure. The traditional bonds of feudal loyalty began to erode under Despenser's pervasive surveillance. Women were not exempt from Despenser's cruelty, often suffering disproportionately. The wives and daughters of his enemies were used as pawns, imprisoned under harsh conditions or forced into politically advantageous marriages. Lady Alice de Lacy, a wealthy heiress, was practically kidnapped and confined under Despenser's control to manage her vast estates. These assaults on women violated the chivalric codes that purportedly governed noble behavior and stirred burgeoning outrage against Despenser's rule. Perhaps most alarming was Despenser's treatment of the church and its officials. Despite medieval reverence for religious authority, he showed no hesitation in imprisoning bishops, confiscating church lands, and manipulating ecclesiastical law for his gain. When Bishop Adam Orleton of Hereford dared to criticize royal policy, Despenser had him arrested and tortured. This sacrilegious conduct shocked contemporary observers and added impiety to the growing list of charges laid against him. The breaking point came with Queen Isabella herself. The Queen, daughter of the King of France and one of Europe's most powerful women, found herself increasingly marginalized and humiliated by Despenser's predominance over her husband. The favorite made no secret of his disdain for Isabella, blocking her access to Edward and systematically diminishing her household and resources. Nevertheless, Isabella was not a woman to be dismissed quietly. In 1325, she was dispatched to France to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV, over disputed territories in Gascony. This diplomatic mission provided her the perfect opportunity to escape. Dispenser's clutches and begin organizing resistance against his regime. Once in France, Isabella gathered support from English exiles and disaffected nobles who had fled Dispenser's reign of terror. Her cause gained significant traction when she formed an alliance with Roger Mortimer, one of the Marcher lords who had narrowly escaped Dispenser's earlier purges. Isabella's propaganda campaign against Dispenser was brilliant in its simplicity and effectiveness. She positioned herself as the wronged queen, driven from her own kingdom by the unnatural influence of her husband's favorite. She underscored Dispenser's flagrant violations of tradition, his attacks on the church and the destruction of noble families. Most effectively, she painted him as a foreign taint upon English values despite his native birth. Isabella's message resonated across Europe, where tales of royal favorites and the chaos they sowed were well known. Presenting herself as the defender of legitimate governance against tyranny, she garnered support from nobles, merchants, and common people who had suffered under Dispenser's oppressive rule. By 1326, she had assembled an invasion force and was poised to return to England. The invasion itself was almost anticlimactic. When Isabella landed in Essex in September 1326, she was greeted as a liberator rather than an invader. The common people, weary of years under Dispenser's oppression, rallied to her banner. More crucially, the nobility once cowed into submission by the favorite seized their chance for vengeance and abandoned Edward II en masse. The king and the Despensers fled westward toward Wales, seeking refuge in regions where Dispenser had previously wielded power. But even there, support evaporated as local leaders recognized their future lay with the queen rather than with the discredited king and his favorite. The network of fear and patronage sustaining Dispenser's power proved to be built on fragile ground when genuinely challenged. Hugh Despenser the Elder was captured first, seized by Isabella's forces while attempting to defend Bristol Castle. His execution was both swift and brutal. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered as a traitor, with his head displayed on London Bridge as a dire warning to others. Yet this was merely a prelude to the more elaborate fate awaiting his son. Hugh Despenser the Younger was finally apprehended near Llantresant in Wales on November 16, 1326. Contemporary accounts depict him as already shattered by the collapse of his world. The man who had terrorized England for over a decade became a quaking figure, reportedly having attempted suicide rather than face capture. However, his captors had no intention of permitting him such an easy escape from justice. The decision regarding Despenser's fate was unambiguous. However, the manner of his execution required meticulous planning. Queen Isabella and her supporters recognized that this death needed to serve multiple ends. It must satisfy the thirst for vengeance among Despenser's many victims, act as a deterrent to future royal favorites, and symbolically cleanse the kingdom of his corruption. The execution they orchestrated was a masterstroke of medieval political theater. On November 24, 1326, Hugh Despenser was brought to Hereford for his final act. The site was symbolic. Hereford lay within the Welsh Marsh, a region where Despenser had once exerted formidable power. And it was also the home of Bishop Adam, whom Despenser had so brutally tortured. The crowd that gathered was vast, drawn not merely by morbid curiosity, but by a fervent desire to witness the demise of their oppressor. Despenser was not afforded the customary courtesy of a trial. Instead, his crimes were publicly recounted. The list was extensive: treason against the crown, theft of royal lands, persecution of nobility, assaults on the church, and the corruption of the king's affections. Each charge elicited roars of approval from the crowd, who had long waited for this moment of reckoning. The executioners approached their grim task with the precision of seasoned craftsmen, fully aware that this was not to be a simple beheading or hanging. It had to serve as a stark demonstration of the consequences awaiting those who dared corrupt the natural order of the kingdom. Every aspect of the punishment was imbued with symbolic significance, and every cut was meticulously calculated to maximize suffering while prolonging consciousness. Despenser was first stripped naked and paraded through the streets of Hereford, offering the crowd a visceral view of the man who had instilled fear for so long. The once mighty favorite, reduced to trembling flesh, became an object of mockery and hatred. Spectators shouted verses that mocked his relationship with the king, throwing refuse at his defenseless body.